On August 9, 1965, a country was born that nobody wanted, least of all its own leader. Singapore wasn't liberated. It was expelled, kicked out of Malaysia after 2 years of racial tension, cast off to survive alone. It was a humid island of 2 million people, smaller than New York City, with no army, no farmland, no oil, and not even its own drinking water, which arrived through pipes controlled by the neighbor that had just thrown it out. Its founding leader announced independence in tears, on live television, calling it a moment of anguish. 60 years later, that abandoned swamp has a higher GDP per person than the United States, the world's best airport, its most important port, and over $1 trillion in sovereign wealth. This is the story of the country that shouldn't exist, and why it can never be copied. Today on the Money Atlas, how fear, geography, and ruthless pragmatism built the most efficient economy on Earth. Quick thing before we dig in. If you enjoy stories that make the world make sense, subscribing is the best way to see the next one, and it costs you nothing. All right, let's get into it. Start with the scoreboard because it's barely believable. In 1965, Singapore's income per person was around $500 a year, a third of Western Europe's, in the same league as Jamaica. Today it's roughly $96,000, higher than America, higher than Germany, roughly double Western Europe. No oil was discovered, no gold was found, no empire conquered. A country with literally zero natural resources outturned nearly every country that has them. Which makes Singapore the purest economic experiment ever run. What happens when a nation's only asset is decisions? Decision number 1. Look at the map. Singapore sits at the mouth of the Strait of Malacca, the narrow sea lane connecting Europe, the Middle East, and India to China, Japan, and Korea. Roughly a third of all world trade sales passed Singapore's doorstep. For centuries that made it a decent colonial harbor. But remember the steel box from our last episode. Containerization turned geography into destiny. While other newly independent nations expelled foreign companies and built walls, Singapore made a colder calculation. If the world's cargo must pass our door anyway, let's make stopping here irresistible. Not a country with a port with a country attached. Today Singapore's port handles over 44 million containers a year, the largest transshipment hub on Earth. And here's the detail that reveals the whole business model. 85% of those boxes never enter Singapore at all. They arrive on one ship, wait a few hours, and leave on another. Singapore is the world's layover, a toll booth that charges not with force, like the Panama Canal, but with excellence. The fastest cranes, the deepest berths, the most reliable schedules on the planet. Ships stop there because not stopping there costs more. It's the same product Switzerland sells in maritime form, certainty. And here's the move that shows the mindset better than any other. Singapore has not one drop of oil and built itself into one of the world's top oil refining and trading hubs. Jurong Island, a chemical fortress reclaimed from the sea, imports crude from everywhere and exports refined fuels, plastics, and petrochemicals to all of Asia. Singapore is also the planet's largest ship refueling station. Vessels detour just to fill their tanks there. Sound familiar? It's Switzerland's watch trick from episode 1, import raw, add skill, export value, and Dubai's playbook before Dubai wrote it. Resources are optional. Position plus processing is the whole game. Decision number 2 was cultural, and it was ice-cold pragmatism. While post-colonial nations everywhere rejected their former rulers' languages and institutions, Lee Kuan Yew kept English as the working language, not out of affection, but because it was the language of money, science, and shipping. He kept British commercial law and enforced it with fanatical consistency. And corruption, the termite that eats developing economies, was annihilated with a two-sided strategy: draconian punishment on one side, and on the other, government salaries so high that a minister can earn over $1 million a year. The logic scandalized the world: pay them like CEOs, jail them like criminals. The result: Singapore ranks among the 5 cleanest governments on earth, decade after decade. Decision 3. Engineer your way out of every weakness. NEWater. Singapore signed treaties for Malaysian water, then spent decades ending the dependence. Today, NEWater, sewage purified to drinking standard, covers up to 40% of demand, on its way to over half. No land. Reclaim it from the sea. Singapore is now a quarter larger than at independence. The airport, the port, the financial district skyline all stand on ground that didn't exist. Every vulnerability was treated the same way, not as fate but as an engineering problem with a deadline. Because for Singapore, unlike almost any country on earth, failure was never abstract. It meant ceasing to exist. And here's the paradox that breaks every ideological box people try to put Singapore in: the freest of free markets, and yet 80% of its citizens live in apartments built by the government. The Housing and Development Board bulldozed the slums of the 60s and built towers by the hundreds of thousands, then sold the flats to citizens on subsidized 99-year leases. Result: 90% home ownership, the highest of any major economy in one of the world's most expensive cities. It wasn't charity, it was strategy. A citizen who owns their home owns a stake in the system. Singapore made every family a shareholder in the country's stability, and shareholders don't burn down the building. How does a state fund flats for 80% of its people without drowning in debt? Through the most muscular savings system on earth, the Central Provident Fund. By law, up to 37% of every Singaporean paycheck, employee plus employer share, flows into personal CPF accounts, which then pay for that HDB flat, retirement, and health care. It's not a tax. The money stays yours, but you cannot not save it. The result: one of the highest national savings rates ever recorded, a housing system that finances itself, and citizens who arrive at retirement with assets instead of promises. Where Western states borrowed to build welfare, Singapore compelled its people to prepay theirs and invested the float. Then there's the money machine almost nobody talks about. Singapore doesn't just balance its budget, it compounds its surpluses. 2 state investment giants, GIC and Temasek, quietly manage a combined portfolio approaching $1.4 trillion, stakes in banks, ports, tech firms across the planet. Norway, from our 4th episode, saves oil money. Singapore has been saving discipline itself, decades of surpluses, invested globally, growing silently. A nation of 6 million people commands more sovereign wealth than most continents. When people ask what Singapore's natural resource is, this is the answer: compound interest on good governance. Now for the part the glossy documentaries skip: the bill. Singapore's miracle came with an authoritarian bargain. One party has governed without interruption since 1959. Opposition politicians have been sued into bankruptcy. The press ranks far down the global freedom tables. Below some countries, Singapore outturns 5 times over. The state that builds your flat also tells you not to chew gum, fines you for jaywalking, and canes vandals. Critics call it Disneyland with the death penalty. Singaporeans themselves named the deal the air-conditioned nation, perfectly comfortable, tightly sealed. The economic miracle is real. So is the trade, prosperity and order in exchange for obedience. Every developing country has a plan to become the next Singapore. None has succeeded, and the reasons are structural. Singapore is a city-state, no impoverished countryside to subsidize, no regional politics, one port, one airport, one government. It had Lee Kuan Yew, one man with one vision and 31 uninterrupted years to execute it, something no democracy can replicate and no dictatorship survives. And it had something you cannot legislate: existential terror. A tiny island surrounded by giants, expelled and alone. For Singapore, discipline wasn't a policy choice. It was the alternative to disappearing. You can copy the policies. You can't copy the fear. Put this episode next to the others, and the atlas starts speaking. Switzerland shows what centuries of compounding trust can build. Argentina shows how fast burning it destroys everything. And Singapore shows the strangest recipe: a country that took mortal fear, of thirst, of poverty, of vanishing off the map, and engineered it into the most disciplined economy in history. 3 countries, 3 fuels: trust, populism, and fear. The atlas keeps proving one thing: wealth is never about what's in the ground. It's about what's in the institutions. 60 years ago, its own federation didn't want it, and its founder wept at its birth. Today, the world's ships wait at its docks, the world's money sits in its vaults, and the world's politicians make pilgrimages to study it. The country that shouldn't exist became the country everyone wishes they could build, and no one can. If this changed how you see small countries, do 3 quick things. Tap like so more people find the video. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next. And turn on notifications, because next time we go from the country that engineered everything to the country trying to buy a miracle off the shelf. A 170-kilometer mirror wall in the desert, a city with no streets, a $1 trillion bet on escaping oil. NEOM, Saudi Arabia's line in the sand. All the sources are in the description. This has been the Money Atlas. See you in the next one.